In the 1960s, John Deere set out to build the biggest, most powerful tractor it had ever made. To do it, they designed a brand new diesel engine, the 531, a six-cylinder powerhouse built for heavy work and big expectations. But when the tractors hit the field, something wasn't right. Performance didn't match the promises, and frustration started to spread across farm country. The 531 was supposed to push Deere ahead of the pack. Instead, it became one of the company's most costly mistakes. How did John Deere's boldest engine end up backfiring so badly? After World War II, American farms were changing fast. Equipment got bigger, fields stretched further, and horsepower demands kept rising. By the 1960s, tractor makers were locked in a fight for dominance. International Harvester rolled out bigger machines, Case chased new designs, and everyone raced to stay ahead. John Deere had made a big splash with the 4010 and 4020, tractors that helped farmers move into the modern era. But Deere knew it couldn't ride that wave forever. Farms were getting bigger, tools were getting heavier, and farmers needed more muscle to get the work done. Inside Deere, the engineers saw it coming. The old 404 diesel from the 4020 wasn't going to be enough for what farmers were asking for next. If Deere wanted to stay in the game, they'd need something stronger, something built from the ground up. That's where the 531 came in, a brand new six-cylinder diesel officially stamped the 6531D, but everyone just called it the 531. It was built to power the 5020, the biggest, toughest row crop tractor Deere had ever made, and a machine that could handle just about any heavy job on the farm. On paper, it looked like the right move. But out in the real world, things were about to get complicated. The 531 was a brand new design, nothing borrowed or patched together from older engines. Deere built it from the ground up to handle serious power, aiming to meet the growing demands of modern American farms. It was a six-cylinder diesel with 531 cubic inches of displacement. Big bore, long stroke. This thing was made for grunt work. In the naturally aspirated version, it had around 140 horsepower. When turbocharged, it could push closer to 175. That might not sound wild today, but in the mid-1960s, that was serious muscle for a row crop tractor. Deere's engineers chose a long stroke design to maximize torque at low engine speeds. Farmers didn't want to run high RPMs all day. They needed steady pulling power to handle bigger plows, rippers, and heavy tillage tools. A longer stroke gave the 531 a strong, steady grunt right where it was needed most. The engine used wet cylinder sleeves, meaning the sleeves sat directly in the block with coolant flowing right around them. This design made overhauls easier. When it was time to rebuild, you could swap out the sleeves instead of boring the block. It was a common setup in heavy machinery at the time, but it came with a trade-off. Wet sleeves were more vulnerable to cavitation if the cooling system wasn't maintained perfectly. Deere also went with direct fuel injection, which was still cutting edge for farm tractors in the early 1960s. It gave better fuel efficiency and quicker starts even in cold weather. On paper, it made the 531 more advanced than a lot of what the competition was offering. Back to the engine rollout. The 531 first showed up in the 5020, the biggest tractor Deere had ever built. At the time, it was the most powerful two-wheel drive tractor on the American market. Then came the 4520, which took the same engine and added a turbocharger. That's when the real cracks in the armor started to show, but we'll get to that soon enough. Deere didn't just stop with tractors either. Versions of the 531 also found their way into industrial machines, combines, and standalone power units. It was meant to be a versatile workhorse, a one-size-fits-all diesel that could handle anything the company threw at it. And for a little while, it looked like it might live up to the hype. Oh, and real quick, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It really helps out my channel. At first, everything looked good. The 5020s were selling, farmers liked the torque, and Deere seemed to have pulled off another big step forward. But it didn't take long for problems to start bubbling up from the fields. Engines were running hotter than they should. Some machines lost power after just a few hundred hours. In worse cases, farmers were dealing with serious breakdowns, things you just didn't expect from a company like John Deere. The biggest trouble started with the engine's cooling system. The 531 had wet cylinder sleeves, meaning coolant flowed right around the outside of the sleeves inside the block. If everything stayed perfect, it worked fine. But if coolant quality dropped, or if any air pockets formed, it kicked off something called cavitation erosion. Tiny vapor bubbles would collapse against the metal sleeves with enough force to eat them away from the inside out. Over time, pinholes would form, coolant would leak into the cylinders, and overheating would follow. And the cooling system didn't leave much room for error. The radiators and water pumps were sized just big enough for normal work, but not much more. When farmers pushed these tractors hard, especially pulling big implements in hot weather, the 531s would run hotter than they should. A small problem could snowball fast. Then there were the heads. Under heavy load, and even more so when Deere turbocharged the engine for the 4520, the cylinder heads were prone to cracking. The extra pressure and heat from the turbocharger pushed the 531's design right to its limit. Some farmers also reported blown head gaskets before the heads themselves even gave out. Once a gasket failed, it wasn't long before more serious engine damage followed. The turbocharging didn't just add stress to the top end. It pushed extra cylinder pressure back into the block itself. Some early 531 blocks weren't beefy enough to handle the load. Under repeated hard pulling, the block could flex slightly. That movement over time caused coolant leaks, misalignment, and in rare cases, complete block failure. Deere eventually beefed up the block castings in later engines, but by then the 531's reputation was already taking a beating. On top of that, the 531's fuel system didn't leave much room for error. It used a high-pressure mechanical injection pump that needed to stay finely tuned. If fuel timing drifted even a little, it could cause uneven combustion, higher cylinder temperatures, and even faster failure under load. Poor quality diesel, common in rural areas at the time, only made the problem worse. And if all that wasn't enough, the 531 was more maintenance sensitive than most farmers expected. Coolant filters and additives, which could have protected the sleeves, weren't originally standard equipment. Plenty of farmers didn't even know they needed special coolant treatment until it was too late. It wasn't every 531 that failed. Some tractors, especially those used for lighter jobs, held up fine for years. But for farmers who worked their tractors hard and expected them to take it, the number of early failures was enough to leave a mark. Deere found itself scrambling to patch things up, but the damage was already being done. John Deere didn't just sit on its hands once the 531's problems started piling up. They knew they had a serious issue, and they moved fast to keep their customers on their side. The first fix came with the cooling system. Deere started pushing coolant conditioner kits out to dealerships, encouraging farmers to install coolant filters that could help stop cavitation erosion before it wrecked the sleeves. Later production models started coming with these systems installed from the factory. They also made internal changes to the 531. Newer versions got stronger cylinder heads and tweaks to the water pumps to improve coolant flow. Service bulletins were sent out to help mechanics spot early signs of trouble. And in some cases, Deere authorized warranty rebuilds for engines that failed too early. But even with these fixes, the core problem remained. The 531 just wasn't built with enough margin. It was fine on paper, but in the real world, under heat, under boost, and under heavy load, it was stretched too thin. Behind the scenes, Deere knew they were fighting to protect their reputation. They didn't come out and publicly admit the 531 had serious design flaws, but they let their actions do the talking. Dealers were given quiet marching orders to work with customers, offering discounted rebuilds, free coolant filter installations, and in some cases, factory-assisted repairs just to keep farmers loyal. In a lot of cases, local John Deere dealers stepped up on their own. Some installed coolant filters at no charge. Others helped farmers negotiate better warranty terms, knowing that keeping a customer happy now was better than losing one for life. It wasn't just about fixing tractors. It was about protecting trust that had taken generations to build. The 531 stayed alive a little while longer, especially in non-turbocharged applications like the 5020. But when Deere rolled out the 6030 tractor, they quietly phased out the 531 and moved to a brand new engine, the 619 cubic inch diesel. Bigger, stronger, and better cooled, the 619 was everything the 531 should have been. The lessons Deere learned from the 531 disaster left a permanent mark. Future engines were overbuilt, cooling systems were given bigger margins, turbocharged designs were field tested harder and longer before production ever started. And while Deere never said it out loud, the way they handled the 531 mess showed that they understood something vital. It wasn't just about building tractors. It was about making sure folks could still count on John Deere. For some farmers, the 531 ran like a champ, at least for a while. But for a lot of others, the story wasn't so smooth. There were farmers who bought brand new 5020s or 4520s only to see them back in the shop within a few hundred hours. Cooling problems, blown head gaskets, cracked heads, you name it. And when a machine that big went down, it wasn't just a headache. It could throw off the whole season. One farmer out of Iowa told the story of buying a 4520 only to have it start losing power during heavy tillage. Turns out, coolant had eaten through the sleeve walls and antifreeze was leaking right into the oil pan. He ended up with a full engine rebuild before the tractor even hit its second year. Another farmer from Nebraska added his own coolant filter system after hearing about cavitation issues from a neighbor. It wasn't something Deere had suggested back then. It was just farmers sharing fixes to problems they were starting to see. Even mechanics remembered the headaches. Some dealership techs said they practically had a stack of service bulletins sitting by the shop phone, because they were getting so many calls about overheating, rough running, and coolant loss. A few even joked that they could rebuild a 531 with their eyes closed by the time Deere moved on to the 619. In Texas, one dealer started keeping a complete short block for the 531 sitting on a crate in the back of the shop, just in case a customer's engine gave up during plowing season. More than once, that block was swapped into a tractor at midnight just to keep a farm from falling behind. A farmer out of Illinois shared a different approach. After blowing a head gasket on his 5020 for the second time, he decided to turn down the fuel delivery himself. He dropped the horsepower to take the pressure off the engine, sacrificing pulling power in exchange for keeping the tractor running through planting season. It wasn't the solution he wanted, but it kept the 5020 working until he could trade up for something better. And for some farmers, the bad experience left a permanent scar. A few never bought another John Deere after their 5020 or 4520 gave them trouble. Others stuck with Deere, but only because their local dealers went out of their way to make it right, quietly fixing engines, cutting deals, and doing everything they could to keep their customers in the fold. The 531 wasn't a disaster for every farmer, but it sure left a trail of frustration wide enough that people are still talking about it today. Even with all the problems tied to the 531, John Deere didn't lose its place at the top of the tractor world. It took a hit, no doubt, but it didn't fall. The company learned from its mistakes. The 531's failures pushed Deere's engineers to start building engines with bigger cooling systems, stronger blocks, and more safety margin across the board. It also changed how Deere tested engines before they went into full production. Real field work, real loads, real heat, not just lab numbers. The most obvious lesson showed up in the 619 diesel, which replaced the 531 and later versions of the 6030. The 619 was bigger, heavier, and better cooled. It had thicker cylinder walls, better water circulation around the sleeves, and a design that could survive higher boost pressures without cracking or overheating. It wasn't just an update, it was a direct answer to everything that had gone wrong with the 531. Later, when Deere rolled out the SoundGuard tractors like the 4630, 4640, and 4840, farmers noticed something right away. The engines were reliable. They weren't just stronger, they were tougher in the long haul. And that was no accident. Those machines were built with hard lessons learned from the 531's growing pains. The lessons didn't just stay on the farm either. Deere's industrial equipment division, building scrapers, loaders, and power units, quietly redesigned their larger diesel engines with better cooling margins and stronger blocks after seeing what went wrong with the 531. Across the company, durability became a bigger priority than squeezing out every last horsepower number. Even Deere's corporate culture shifted. After the 531 mess, the company emphasized longer validation testing, not just engineering calculations. Engines had to survive real field work, not just look good on a spec sheet. In a strange way, the 531 helped Deere stay on top. By forcing the company to fix real-world problems instead of chasing paper specs, it laid the groundwork for a new generation of tractors that would dominate American farms through the 1970s and 80s. If there's one thing the 531 proved, it's that no company, not even John Deere, is immune to taking a bad step when the pressure's on. But what set Deere apart was what came next. They took the hit, learned the hard lessons, and came back stronger. Most companies don't survive mistakes like that. Deere turned theirs into a blueprint for building some of the toughest tractors the world had ever seen. Not every piece of green iron is perfect, but the ones that last, they owe a little something to the hard lessons of the 531.